Order, order. Welcome to this afternoon session of the Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee, where we are scrutinising the work of the department, and we are delighted to have for the second time this Parliament the Secretary of State, Right Honourable Ed Miliband MP, and the Permanent Secretary, Jeremy Pocklington. Gentlemen, you are both very, very welcome. I shall start with the questioning before passing on to my colleagues. And you've had a very busy first year. Do you think you are close to delivering change rather than still in the planning phase?
Well, thank you, Chair. And can I start by putting on record my thanks to you and your committee for your excellent work. And I have had the benefit of reading some of the transcripts of your evidence sessions. And so I just want to just say thank you to you for the really interesting work you're doing. To answer your question directly, look, I'm incredibly proud of the pace we've set as a department and what we are already delivering. I think you see across industry stakeholders a really kind of response that says they have noticed the acceleration in the pace of not just ambition but delivery. And I'll just mention a few things where I think we've made real progress. Energy generation, the lifting of the onshore wind ban, the most successful renewables auction ever, the amount of solar consented in 12 months compared to the previous 14 years, the new future home standard with solar as standard, and big reform of grid and planning. On investment, the biggest investment in clean energy in our history as a country in the spending review, including the biggest investment in nuclear in half a century, investment in 4 CCUS clusters, hydrogen transport and storage, and meeting our manifesto commitments on the Warm Homes Plan and Great British Energy. And then on tangible results this year, a few things I would point to. Nearly 3 million extra families will get the £150 Warm Homes discount this winter, 200 schools and 200 hospitals to see their energy bills cut by Great British Energy this year through solar panels, and beginning the process of helping 5 million families under the Warm Homes Plan. Just to say something about priorities for the year ahead, though, to take the sort of the context of the later part of your question, I'd say 4 things. First, driving forward at pace on the energy generation we need to get off the roller coaster of fossil fuels. Secondly, translating the benefits of the mission into lower bills for people and communities, including delivering the Warm Homes Plan, which will help cut bills, expanding solar to more communities and families. Third, and this is a piece of work that Jeremy and I have been engaged on, is we consider ourselves an industrial policy department now, not just an energy policy department. So delivering on the promise of good jobs across the country, which the investments I've talked about will make possible, and making sure these are good jobs with decent wages and strong trade unions. And then fourth, internationally, working with other countries to keep momentum driving forward on the road to COP30 and beyond. So, I think a lot done, a lot to do, as a slogan I used in an earlier stage of my life.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've outlined a pretty good agenda for the next hour and a half, and my colleagues and I will be asking you more detailed questions on most of those points in our time. We're going to ask you more about workforce planning a bit later on as well. But how important are the trade unions to both informing workers about the benefits of the transition and also in delivering the energy transition?
Very important, and I think it's a big change from the past. We inherited a situation where trade unions were just seen as special interests, basically, and pretty marginalised special interests. And look, I just do want to say quite clearly, I think the renewables industry still has some way to go in recognising the value and role of trade unions. This was an industry born at a time when trade unions were sort of quite far from being flavour of the month, and somehow it's been seen as sort of, I think by some in the renewables industry, as a sort of, they don't need to bother with trade unions. I am really encouraging, obviously companies have to make their own decisions, but I'm very, very encouraging of the role of trade unions. I think in the supply chains, you've recently seen an agreement between SEA Wind and the GMB union recognition agreement, which is really, really important. This is just in the last few weeks. We've also seen GB Energy Nuclear reach agreement with the Prospect Trade Union, and we want to see more of this happen. And look, why? Because I believe that trade unions have a crucial role to play in our society, because I think they can actually make businesses work better, not worse. I don't take an old-fashioned view that somehow trade unions are a recipe for conflict. They can be a recipe for cooperation and success. And workers deserve to be properly represented. And so this is a really big emphasis that I've tried to show leadership on in the last year. I'd also mention EDF Renewables have also reached agreements with the trade unions as well in the last year.
Would you apply the same approach to the energy retail market?
I would encourage all companies involved in the energy sector to take seriously the role that trade unions can play in their companies.
Thank you. Now, when you gave your statement about energy market reform, I asked you about demand flexibility, and you talked about some of the tangible opportunities through electrification of heat for consumers and so on. But do you also see potential growing opportunity for consumers to take advantage of different tariffs, of the market to produce different tariffs to help people bring down their bills? And how do you see clarity being provided so that people understand them to take full advantage?
Yes, look, I think it's a really good question, Chair. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, I think the combination of heat pumps, potentially solar panels, potentially batteries, offer a way to give people real control over when they use electricity. And after all, the sort of wider promise here is to get off the insecurity of fossil fuels and onto clean electricity, homegrown clean electricity. So that's the first point. Secondly, we're moving in the direction over the next couple of years of minimum half-hourly settlements, which is a sort of technical thing, but it means that basically, the much clearer option, if you like, of reduced tariffs at different times of the day. Now, this is obviously entirely voluntary, but I think it does offer the opportunity for people to manage their usage in a way that they can take advantage of. Now, I think I use the phrase consumer-led flexibility because I think it is very, very important that it's voluntary and it's consumer-led. Although actually what's so interesting is that when this was tried, first of all, a couple of years ago in the winter, I think of 22, there was actually much bigger take-up than was expected. So I think it's where consumers want to go, and it's something we want to enable as much as possible.
Can I just add, obviously, this is something we are working very closely with Ofgem and NESO, and we have together a low-carbon flexibility roadmap in order to bring forward that consumer-led flexibility that the Secretary of State just outlined. Obviously, market-wide half-hourly settlement and smart meters are the sort of key enabling tools that underpin that. But we have seen strong interest from the sector and obviously innovation as well that all supports that journey.
Okay, well, thank you for the additional information. I declare an interest as a recent owner of a heat pump, which is functioning very well.
Are you enjoying it?
I am. Hotter water than I had with the gas boiler, I should say. And I benefited from the change in the in planning regulations on the
1 metre rule.
The 1 metre.
I'm glad we've been of service to you, Chair.
It's a personal counselling session here or advice session from the department. However, I hear from some of the retailers that still 35% of heat pump installations require planning consent due to noise, and that anything above 35 decibels, which is similar to using a computer, and a lot less than the noise from a fridge, requires planning consent, and as a result, that's why heat pumps require it if they are too close to their neighbours. Do you think that further adjustments are needed here?
So let me let me answer that directly. On the what we've done is we've changed the permitted development right on the 1 metre rule, as you said, and this was talked about for a long time, and nothing was really ever done about it, and I think it has made a difference. I know some retailers I think have said to you that this the noise issue remains a big barrier. You've drawn that to our attention. We're going to look at that. As to whether this is about the rules and the way they are being enforced and the knowledge of the rules, because often what I find on some of these planning issues is sometimes it's the rules and sometimes it's the enforcement of the rules and sometimes it's the awareness of the rules, and you've got to work out which it is. But I think my overall approach would be to say, look, where there are barriers, let's get rid of them if we possibly can, and if the noise thing is a barrier, obviously subject to making sure that there isn't disturbance to people, which I don't think there will be, we should act on it.
Thank you for those answers. Now, we heard on the Sunday media round the Leader of Reform, Nigel Farage, saying something that is often repeated, which is what is the point of us transitioning to net zero when we are responsible for such a tiny fraction of the world's emissions. Now, in our inquiry, Building the Case for the Energy Transition, we've heard evidence of the economic benefits, of the national security benefits. What do you think is the answer to what Mr. Farage was saying yesterday, and what quite a lot of people, in my experience, also say?
We're taking action on the clean energy transition because it's the right thing to do for the country today, and it's the right thing for future generations. And it's really important to say this. You know, I think Nigel Farage wants to airbrush history. He wants people to forget about the fact that it was our exposure to fossil fuels that led to the worst cost of living crisis in generations. Family finances wrecked, business finances wrecked and still paying the price, perhaps we'll come on to that, and public finances wrecked as well. And there is only one answer to that, which is homegrown clean energy we control. And the security you get from that homegrown clean energy is what is now essential for our energy security and our national security. And anything else, any decision to say let's just remain on fossil fuels subject to a global market controlled by petrostates and dictators is frankly surrenders our energy security and indeed our national security. And so, you know, Reform can sort of make these arguments, but they fly in the face of the British people's experience of what has happened to them and what they are still facing. Plus, as well as energy security, this is the right thing to do for jobs. And if you go to what's happening at Sizewell, or carbon capture and storage in 4 different parts of the country, or indeed offshore wind, or what we hope to do on hydrogen, this is the jobs opportunity of the 21st century, and we should seize it. It's also the right thing for future generations as well. As I said in my climate and nature statement a week ago, we should be proud of what Britain have done under governments of both the Conservative and Labour parties in taking a lead and others following.
You're carrying out a public participation survey, or you're about to. Do you think that will be sufficient to ensure people have all the facts and are able to see for themselves the benefits that you've just set out, or do you think, and just an allied point, who are the best people to carry these messages? Who is most trusted in this space?
Well, look, I'm thinking your inquiry is a really important inquiry, and I'll look forward to seeing the results of it. We've got to make the case, and I think all of us have to make the case who believe in this case. And, you know, I think workers who are benefiting from clean energy, scientists who can tell us why we need to act, businesses that are also operating in this area, but also ourselves as politicians. If we believe in this, we should make the argument. And, you know, I think it's interesting this, because we've had two Reform mayors elected, Andrea Jenkins and Luke Campbell. They've just taken funding from my department for clean power in their areas, and I'm really pleased that they're taking that funding. But the lesson of this is that those mayors faced with the choice of cutting bills through clean power or keeping their areas locked on expensive, insecure fossil fuels chose the clean power course. And I think it proves that Reform's energy policy, frankly, disintegrates upon contact with reality and on contact with what the British people actually want to see.
Thank you. Now, I know you're going to publish the Warm Homes Plan in the autumn, I think. And thank you very much for the response to our retrofitting homes for net zero report, in which you made very clear that's what you were going to do, because it was broadly the answer you gave to our recommendations. Your offer is to cut energy bills for consumers by hundreds of pounds. How will you ensure that people recognise that this is the result of government action?
Well, look, I think the most important thing is that it happens. And, you know, I think it is worth pausing on that for a moment. In a very, very tight fiscal backdrop, the Chancellor chose to invest 13.2 billion over the Parliament in the Warm Homes Plan, in line with our manifesto commitment. I think it's incredibly important. It's part of contributing to us upgrading 5 million homes over this Parliament. And look, this is about social justice. This is, if you take our Warm Homes obligation, this is about delivering in particular, and we'll talk more about this in the autumn, to the poorest families, a combination of energy efficiency, heat pump technology, batteries, solar panels that can cut people's bills for good. And this is something that the Prime Minister often talks about, which is not a sticking plaster, but actually cutting bills for good. And, you know, we will shout about this, make this clear, that this is something that this Labour government is doing and choosing to do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will pass over to Polly Billington now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Richard Tice, the Member of Parliament for Skegness, wrote some letters to energy companies last week saying a future Reform government would cancel contracts for renewable energy. What do you think about that?
Well, it was, if I'm allowed to use this phrase, a sort of clown car operation, I think it's fair to say, by Richard Tice, because he wrote a letter saying he was going to rip up the contracts and then went on the PM programme that afternoon to rebut his own letter and to say that he'd been highly misinterpreted and he wasn't going to tear up the contract. Look, I think the broader point here is that this is driven not by concern for the British people or interest in people's energy bills. It's ideology, and as I think Theresa May put it a few months back, it's the people pushing this anti-clean energy agenda that are the real ideologues in this. Because why would you want to stay on expensive, insecure fossil fuels? And we only need to look at the geopolitical situation to see the level of insecurity and exposure that we have. Why would you want to stay on those when you can have cheap, clean power that we control?
I think one of the questions that he suggests that is an issue is that we may lose jobs as a result of this in different industries, and also that there is not at the moment, with the current energy market, there's not an absolute conviction or clarity about the pathway to making sure that this does result in cheaper energy for everybody, particularly for businesses.
I mean, it's very interesting that you should ask this question, Polly, because the industrial energy prices thing is very serious situation, and I read with interest some of the testimony you had to your committee as part of your cost of energy inquiry. But it's really important to understand why this happened, because what's basically happened is that when the crisis, I've got a sort of chart here, when the crisis hit, when Russia invaded Ukraine, industrial energy prices basically doubled. And they haven't got, the gas price hasn't got back to the level it was at in the past. And so bills are remaining high. And I was particularly struck by some some testimony that you had from the director of the Energy Intensive Users Group, who said to your committee, and I quote, "With the energy crisis that hit after Russia invaded Ukraine, it's the wholesale electricity price that has been the dominant factor in driving electricity prices." In other words, there are people who want to use their opposition to clean energy and climate action to say this is all the fault of that, but they're just wrong. And that's what the energy-intensive industries are saying. Now, I don't want to underestimate some of the seriousness of the situation, but first of all, we've got to work out the reasons why industrial energy prices are high, and secondly, the really irresponsible thing about what Richard Tice is doing with that letter is he's almost deliberately putting at risk tens of thousands of jobs across our country. The net zero economy grew 3 times faster than the economy as a whole last year. He's sending a message to business and others, don't come and invest in Britain. We're sending the message, come and invest in Britain, and actually to the tune of about 50 billion. They have been investing in Britain since the election, making commitments to invest in Britain, and that's about good jobs for people up and down the country, including in your constituency, and indeed Richard Tice's.
Could I just have one follow-up on that? I absolutely appreciate there's about 1 million jobs involved in this industry overall, but there are jobs that will need to change or disappear. So what do you see your role as Secretary of State? As you said, you're an industrial policy department as well as an energy policy department. What do you see your role as in making sure that transition away from dirty fossil fuels does not mean the kind of absolute trashing of communities that we saw in our lifetime 40 years ago?
Look, we should be judged on the justice of this transition. We are absolutely determined to have a just transition. And look, let's just take the North Sea for a minute. 70,000 jobs were lost in the North Sea, have been lost in the North Sea in less than a decade, because the North Sea is a declining basin. And the truth is that unless you build that future in carbon capture and storage, in offshore wind, in hydrogen, in a whole range of other areas, unless you make sure that when we build that offshore wind, it is built in Britain as well as elsewhere, then we are not going to replace those jobs that are declining. And so, I absolutely accept that we should be judged on the justness of this transition. In order to make this transition just, you've got to put in place the levers to make it so, and that's, in a way, goes back to the opening question from the chair. That's what the National Wealth Fund, Great British Energy, our clean industry bonus as part of auction round 7, all of these things are absolutely designed to do. And one of the things that Jeremy and I spend a lot of time talking about is how do we make sure that we are that industrial policy department that is actually delivering those jobs for the future.
And in the context of that, the clean energy target of 2030, does that militate against the development of the supply chains that we will need in the long term because we're going faster rather than fairer?
Quite the opposite. Because actually, if you think about the building of network infrastructure, it's creating tens of thousands of jobs. If you think about the signal we're sending to investors, look, I meet investors all the time from all around the world. And I'm not trying to blow our own trumpet here, but so many of them say to me, you're a government with a stable majority, and you're a government which has a clear plan. And you know what you're doing. You're saying, you're minimising uncertainty, and we'll perhaps come on to zonal pricing and all that. You're minimising the uncertainty. You're creating the stable environment in which we can invest. And frankly, given all of the pressures around the world and some of the doubts that some people are expressing on this agenda, for businesses, having somewhere to invest that they can rely on, and they say this to me explicitly, is so important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll follow up briefly on some of what you just said. Lindsay Oil Refinery was in the news recently with the administration, and the workers there, anecdotally and perhaps more than anecdotally, are saying, look, we see all these renewables being developed, we see our jobs being lost. We can only conclude that our jobs are going because of net zero. What's the way of addressing it? It sort of goes to the previous discussion.
Let me come to the specific and the general. On the specific, let's just be absolutely clear of what's happened at that refinery, is that the workers have been deeply let down by the people who ran the refinery. And I am deeply disturbed by some of what I have seen and heard and some of my experiences in dealing with the people running the refinery during the run-up to the announcement. That's why I've written to the Insolvency Service asking them to look into some of the conduct that we saw. This has been a loss-making refinery over the years it's been controlled by the particular company. More broadly, but you know, I have deep sympathy with the workers and the community, and my colleague Michael Shanks went to see the workers last week to talk to them about the situation. Obviously, the official receiver will have to make announcements about the future of the refinery. But more broadly on the refinery sector, this is a sector that myself and Michael are really engaged in. We had a meeting Michael had a meeting last month, I had one earlier this month, with the umbrella body that covers the refinery sector. I would just say in passing that they said that was the first meeting they'd had with ministers in 13 years, because they had reached out to previous ministers and hadn't had any meetings. And we are looking at some of the specific circumstances facing the refinery sector, including looking at the so-called EII, Energy Intensive Industries Compensation Scheme, which the refinery sector doesn't qualify for. It's also worth saying that there are refineries that are doing well, like the Phillips 66 refinery, which is nearby to Prax. Investing in CCS can help the refinery sector. SAF can help the refinery sector. Look, part of the challenge here is we can't as government stop the process of industrial change, but we must make the process of industrial change work for workers and communities, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Yeah, thank you. I'd add to Phillips 66 the SR refinery, which is near my constituency, who would make a similar case. You were talking before about the high costs of energy, and this was in relation to business costs in particular, but it's true for domestic and industrial users. Why are our transmission costs, as well as our generation costs, so much higher than France and Germany?
Look, the fundamental problem we have here is our exposure to fossil fuels. That is the sort of, and you know, I think it came through in your cost of energy inquiry, particularly on the industrial side. I think it came through in what I said from the Energy Intensive Users Group. The whole point of Clean Power 2030 is to get us off reliance on gas, because you know, and we've seen it in the time that this government has been in power. You know, the wholesale gas price goes up, and it feeds through to bills. The price goes down, and thankfully it feeds through into a reduction in bills. But it's not in our control. And if we want to have control, if we want to take back control, then we need this homegrown clean energy. And every solar panel we put up, every wind turbine we put up, gives us that, every nuclear power station that we can build gives us that greater control. Now, specifically, if you're talking about industrial users, I'm really pleased at what we were able to do in the industrial strategy. The previous government took action through the supercharger to help around 500 businesses. We're now helping 7,000 energy-intensive industries through the BICS scheme. I recognise from the and this has been widely welcomed by Make UK, the British Chambers of Commerce and others. I recognise in your inquiry the issue for those businesses not necessarily being helped by these measures. The best answer is to drive towards Clean Power 2030 because it gets us off this reliance on gas. And the key thing about driving to renewables is it lowers the wholesale price. You know, that the fundamentals here. How is it that clean power is about bringing down bills for good? Because it lowers the wholesale price and gets us off the link to gas.
So the Clean Power 2030 agenda will move us on to CFDs setting the prices, essentially. Is it right that government effectively sets the price?
Well, it's through an auction. I mean, look, we set an administrative strike price, but that's a ceiling, and then it's through an auction process. And you know, one of the things I take incredibly seriously, I took it seriously with AR6, but if you like, I inherited it mid-flight, and and I'm taking it very, very seriously for AR7, is how we both maximise deployment but do it in a value for money way. And the sort of big focus we've had, and we've announced some of the changes on this, including lengthening CFDs, including who we let into the competition, is to make sure that we maximise the deal we get for the bill payer through this process.
Thank you. Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, and I will come to my set of questions. But we also understand, and our leader Ed Davey has pointed that out last week, that in the meantime, I totally agree with what you're saying about we need to get away from the reliance on fossil fuels and therefore the strategy of the government to have more renewables. I absolutely agree with that. But in the meantime, our electricity cost is still too much dependent on gas prices because they're linked together. The wholesale gas price is linked to the electricity price, and there is a proposal on the table of how to change that to get away from the ROCs onto CFDs, and I hope the department is looking very closely in that proposal because that is one of the reasons why our energy prices are still so high. But Chair, I know that you want to ask me a completely different set of questions, and therefore I will move.
It's up to you to ask the questions you want to ask.
I hope that you, Secretary of State, will look at the proposals from our leader, Ed Davey, about our.
Shall I just to sort of? But there's one thing worth having because the modellers have been hard at work. So I've got some sort of modelling. It's just important to. We love the modellers, particularly in our department. Look, just one thing to say is some useful figures for the committee. In 2024, gas power plants set the price of electricity 2/3 of the time. In 2030, our modelling suggests they would set the price only 1/3 of the time. But there's something more, sort of even more important, if you like, which is in 2024, around 1/5 of generation was shielded from the wholesale price through CFDs and feed-in tariffs and nuclear. In 2030, this will cover 2/3 of generation. So what you're seeing is a big switch in how much of the time gas sets the price and the extent to which any sort of benefits of cheaper power are fed through to consumers. Obviously, I'm familiar with the issue, Wira, that you talked about, and we'll look at any proposals that there are on this.
Thank you. And I'm sure we can very much cooperate on this. So the questions that I now want to ask is about this committee. So we obviously see the value of this committee. We spend a lot of time, of our time, and it's interesting, but obviously we want to be of value to the whole system. So you as Secretary of State and your department, what is the value of the committee to you?
That sounds like a sort of too softball a question. There must be a but coming on. I see the committee as very valuable, and I'm not saying that to butter you up. As I say, I spent part of the weekend. My enjoyable Sunday reading was your testimony, previous testimony that you'd had, and that was very useful.
Yes, and here comes the slightly harder
Yeah,
part.
I knew that was coming.
So department letters to the committee are often simply a rehash of written ministerial statements. Given we are a more informed audience, could you consider providing a bit more detail or analysis in these letters?
Okay, so one nerd level down, if you like. I consider that a compliment, by the way, when I say that. That's absolutely fine. And if the request of the committee is that when we do written ministerial statements, we provide extra detail to the committee, I'm sure that's something we can a request that we can meet.
And sort of giving more information to the committee ahead of media, for example, is that also a possibility?
I mean, look, I'm very happy to look at how we do this. We obviously, are careful about making sure that we do written ministerial statements in Parliament and so on, and indeed oral statements. But obviously, I'm happy to take offline with the committee. The chair and I and the clerk had a conversation about this last week, how we can furnish the committee as well as we can with the information it needs.
Thank you very much. Mike Reeder.
I just want to pick up on Polly and Vera's questions. So to say, you've often said energy security is national security. Do you still believe in that?
I really do, Mike. And I think you only need to look at some of the instability we've seen in our world in relation to Iran, for example, in recent months, and to see the extent to which oil and gas prices responded to that, to see, how vulnerable we are as a country through our reliance on fossil fuels, and whether that is the North Sea, which plays an important role and continues to play an important role in terms of oil and gas, or imported oil and gas, the price is the same, and therefore, if we're going to have energy security, clean homegrown power seems to me to be the absolutely key answer.
So, I like the fact that you have a very kind of collegiate style in the chamber and on the media, but in response to Polly's question, we've got a member of this House who is essentially risking national security by trying to undermine the energy sector and investment. Do you think your response has been tough enough?
Happy to be tougher. Look, I think it is deeply irresponsible what Richard Tice is doing, and I think, frankly, it's playing politics with people's jobs and people's bills. For all of the workers who rely on working in clean energy, to the nuclear workers at Hinkley Point, indeed future nuclear workers at Sizewell, to those working on carbon capture and storage, to those working on offshore wind, to those working right across this sector, which, as I said earlier, the net zero sector grew 3 times faster than the economy as a whole, and goodness knows we need these jobs and we need this growth. It is deeply, deeply irresponsible. And as I say, I think when it has come into contact with reality, you've even got reform mayors now saying, well, we're distancing ourselves from this, essentially. And it's not where the British people are. I don't think the British people do want a culture war on this. I actually think people want the benefits of clean energy. They think it's the right thing for the country. We've got to do it, and we're determined to do it in a way that makes the pressures on people's living standards easier, not harder. But honestly, I think it's deeply, deeply irresponsible. I actually don't think it'll work either.
So, your role, your department's role, is to provide certainty to the market. We heard repeatedly in the delays on announcing your position on REMA, even led the committee to write a letter to you. What have you learned from that process? Because clearly we heard from businesses they were not going to invest in contracts of difference because of the uncertainty, and it has slowed down investment in the sector. So what have you learned from that process, and how can we make sure we get decisions quicker from the department?
Well, look, the thing I would say to you is REMA was an incredibly complicated process, an incredibly complicated piece of work, and it was really, really important we got it right. We said the end of last year that we would announce the REMA decision in time for the opening of the AR7 auction, which is at the beginning of August. We've done that. We've fulfilled the commitment. I think it's been widely welcomed by the industry that frankly, where uncertainty was the enemy of investment. And so, we are absolutely committed to timely decision making and correct decision making. And sometimes you need to make sure you really need to kick the tires, particularly on something like this kind of reform.
And I guess there is a challenge that when you go quickly, you can get misalignment of government processes and decisions. And Jeremy, in our report, Gridlog or Growth, we were quite critical of the work of the department and the lack of kind of engagement and transparency with this committee as we tried to deliver our inquiry. What has the department learned from that, and can we see better working with our committee, particularly where you're working at pace?
As the Secretary of State says, we're very happy to work with you to find the best way possible to work collaboratively with you. It's obviously a very, very important part of holding the department to account. I feel that as permanent secretary, and it's also part of consultation and getting better quality policy outcomes as a result.
Do you recognise in that, as we picked out Gridlock for Growth, there's definitely misalignment between this committee and the department, and can you assure us that we won't see that in future?
Our job is to do everything we can to serve the government of the day, but that does include obviously taking into account the views of this committee very, very carefully, and that is the commitment that I will give. We will consider all recommendations with absolute clarity.
And I think, Mike, you've in a way answered your own question partly as well, if I can put it this way, which is we are dealing with this sort of dilemma of doing things at pace, but doing things in a collaborative way. And if you think about the list I gave at the beginning, which is a very partial list of the things we've done over the last year, it has involved acting at speed, move fast and build things, as I say. And so, if sometimes it hasn't meant that the committee has been consulted as perhaps it might have wanted to be, I mean, that is the explanation. Now, I'm sure we can always find ways of improving, but this is one of the challenges of moving at pace. If I'm honest, I think government finds it hard to move at pace in general. And in a sense, we've been trying to move things along because we recognise the urgency in a whole number of respects.
And my final question, this theme of certainty. During the election, a very clear pledge from the Labour Party on £300. There's been a lot of criticism of the department and the government of dropping that direct commitment, and you'll probably tell me you haven't. Is that £300 off people's energy bills still a firm commitment from this government?
Look, we said we would cut people's bills by up to £300, and that remains a commitment. It was based on independent modelling. The key thing is that what we need to do is move to a system that can cut bills for good. And the way to do that is with the lower wholesale prices that renewable energy will bring.
Thank you. Luke Murphy.
Thank you very much. My question leads nicely on from what Mike was asking there, because the government obviously has the commitment to make electricity cheaper. You've clearly set out through your Clean Power plan that the main driver of that will be reducing dependence on volatile fossil fuels. But do you worry that if the government is unable to deliver some of that benefit within this Parliament to quite a wide span of consumers, that Richard Tice might effectively persuade people that somehow renewable, the drive for clean power, is to blame?
Well, look, here's the interesting thing, Luke, is, and I want to just sort of expand a little bit on my thinking here. We've got the, if you like, the sort of top-down commitment around up to £300 by 2030, but we don't need to wait to 2030 to start delivering benefits to people. So let me just give you some examples. The Warm Homes discount, 3 million families, £150. 3 million extra families, just to be clear, 2.7 million extra families getting £150 off their bills this winter, not in 2030, but this winter. 5 million people by 2030 getting lower bills as a result of the Warm Homes Plan. Partly the investment through the Warm Homes Plan, and partly the regulation, energy efficiency standards, private rented sector, social rented sector, and so on. And that's just the beginning. I mean, I'll give you my particular interest, one particular interest that I've got at the moment, which is, I think it's something like 1.7 million, I'd have to check the figure, families have solar panels on their rooftops in the UK at the moment. I mean, we are just in the foothills of what we can do. And this is all about bringing, and we announced that for new homes, solar panels will be fitted as standard. That's a few £100 off people's bills, just on its own. So we're going to deliver this two ways. We're going to deliver it by 2030, and we're also I'm also absolutely determined that we deliver in the meantime and convert that clean power benefit to people. I mean, I'll give you another example. What we're doing for schools and hospitals is not about consumers, is for 200 schools, 200 hospitals cutting their energy bills, and we want to make that scheme bigger. And ever since that scheme launched, I've had lots of people saying, what about sports clubs? What about miners' welfares? What about this? What about that? So, and I'm really in the market for this. The point is, and this is what's interesting about the reform mayors, is they themselves see, I think it's swimming pools, leisure centres and so on, solar panels, they themselves see, well, why would we be against this? This is just going to cut people's bills. Why not use the free resource that we have to cut people's bills?
Are you looking at other measures that might reduce bills in the near term? So ideas like rebalancing levies, for example, reform of the standing charge. Is that something that
I think? Look, on the standing charge, this is where Ofgem is thinking about how they do this. I think let me sort of deal with it in two different ways, because I think there's two different sort of ideas in the question. One is, are there reforms we can do to things like the standing charge, and Ofgem is looking at that. and we do want to bear down on the cost of the standing charge. I think one has to sort of kind of confront the fact that if you take money from one place, you've got to find it from somewhere else, and it's where do you find that? Then just sort of relatedly, I think maybe your question is about the electricity versus gas issue, which I know has been an issue at your committee, and it's a long-standing sort of ask of various people, including the CCC, that we find a way to reduce the cost of electricity. We're obviously looking at that. It's really important that if you move forward with something like that, you can do so in a way that's fair, because the obvious problem with a straight rebalancing is you're taking 100% of people who pay electricity and you're loading the levies onto 80% of people who pay gas, and so you're increasing the price for 80%, essentially for 80% of households. And, any measure we take, I want to do in a way that is fair, not just to the people who are getting the heat pumps or electricity, but is fair to everybody.
You alluded to it earlier, and thinking about who might pay. There are two proposals out there around gas plants, bringing them into public ownership or regulating them through the RAB model. The idea being that ahead of reform in delivering the change by 2030, the government would have more control about how the price is set. Is that something the government is assessing? Do you think the description is right that the legacy gas power plants can effectively hold the government hostage in the setting of it?
We've got the capacity market in place on gas plants. I don't think we're about to go into public ownership of the gas plants. That's not on my agenda. I've seen the report you talked about. But obviously, we continue to look at how we can get best value for money from the capacity market. What is interesting is that what you're seeing in the clean power plans is that gas is going to be playing a slightly different role, well, quite a different role, because it's essentially functioning as a backup in the electricity system. And so we are looking at the role of the capacity market in that context.
And just final question from me. It's really clear whether the government will have met its clean power target by 2030. The government would have started the Parliament with some of the highest consumer energy prices and the highest industrial prices in the developed world. What's the measure of success that you will be using at the end of this Parliament to determine whether the government has been successful in bringing down bills for both consumers and industrial users?
Look, we want to do everything we can to get bills down. I think there's a truth here, which is lots of what is happening is to do with the gas market, but we're determined to bring the bills down.
Thank you. And now, a number of times you've understandably made the point that your commitment is to reduce the reliance on gas as a long-term policy to bring bills down. You used the phrase a few minutes ago, take the money from one place to move it to another. There is money being made, a lot of money being made in energy, in one part of energy, which is in generation largely. Is there an argument, is there potential for using some of the money being made there to reduce bills?
We obviously have a windfall tax in place, which has been playing an important role in raising revenue. There is a wider question, which I think you're making reference to, Chair, which is the sort of balance, if you like, between levies and public expenditure. You always have to be careful what you say, given the Treasury is always watching. And obviously it's a very difficult fiscal backdrop that we face. But obviously governments always continue to look at this question of the balance between the role of levies and the role of public spending.
Thank you. I kind of guessed I'd get that sort of answer, to be honest.
I'm sorry to disappoint or pleased to meet your expectations.
Thank you. We will move on to Vera Hobhouse again.
And another little softball coming your way.
Oh, gosh.
In January, you refused to publish the minutes of the Clean Energy Mission Board, saying It was not practice for cabinet committees to do so. Might you commit to publishing the membership of the mission board, like cabinet committees do?
This is a kind of difficult question. You referred to the permanent secretary. Look, let me just give some sort of context to this, which is, a bit like cabinet level committees. We don't tend to share these the details of mission boards publicly. Let me just say broadly, because I think it is important, and we haven't really talked about the sense the mission-led nature of this. As far as I'm concerned, from our department's point of view, mission-led government is working. It's really important to say this. We've got Chris Stark running mission control in our department. The level of cooperation there has been with MHCLG, with MOD, with the Treasury, with other government with DBT, with other government departments, has been really, really important to us. Particularly, I would raise MHCLG, because on so many different planning issues, we talked about the 1 metre rule, talked about the future home standard. All of those things are essentially MHCLG owned policy. And so the mission-led approach, MOD, there's been long-standing issues in radar. We've had a really great cooperation from the Defence Secretary and his and the people in the MOD on this, this has been such a sort of bugbear for such a long time. If you think about DEFRA, my colleague Steve Reed at DEFRA, crucial to moving forward on lots of the issues that have blighted lots of the kind of offshore wind and other things. So as far as I'm concerned, mission-led government, including through the mission boards, is working.
So you are pointing to that, mission-led government is about not getting out of the silo in government. Which one is, would you say, the biggest disconnect in government? You said the MOD, MLC.
We're all very frightfully connected. No, I think what's happened here is, Patrick Vallance always said to me that the COVID task force had a great thing on its side, which is it was a Prime Minister led response to a national emergency, and what he always said to me was, this needs to have the authority of the Prime Minister, which the mission does, because Clean Power by 2030, accelerating to net zero, so both limbs of the mission. And that has made a real difference. I don't know whether, I don't want to put you in a difficult position to talk about making invidious comparisons, but I genuinely feel that there has been a real responsiveness across government to this.
So what I would add is, look, I've been in the civil service a long time, and I think I would say that the mission approach is the most effective I have seen for driving collaboration and joint working between departments. That has been very visible over the past year, and that is on both pillars of the mission, clean power and accelerating to net zero. Whether it has been the working with MHCLG on planning reform and the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, currently going through Parliament, the work with DEFRA on the environmental mitigations, protecting the environment, but getting the development and the generation that we need, and including these very challenging subjects like MOD and radar, where we've got to both deliver our national security objectives, but also get the wind power that we need. It's provided that clarity of direction. And what it often means is that when you're actually engaging at different levels, not just at Secretary of State, at the mission board and with ministers and with officials, there's a degree to an extent that teams and officials can sort of self-action. They know this is a priority, and this is something that will matter not just to the department but to the Prime Minister and to the government, and that has helped make progress. Now, it's not always easy, and there's much more that we need to do. But I've been very, very struck by the engagement from all departments, I would say, in government.
And since we need some more good news stories, is there anything, even if the detail cannot be published, anything where the public can share a little bit into some of these success stories?
I would say one thing, which is, I hope I'm not going to get into trouble for saying this, but we had an excellent discussion about the whole EVs question across government. And I think what you've seen, both on the 2030 mandate and on the recent announcement on demand support, I think has been a product of discussions across government. In particular, DFT, led by my colleague Heidi Alexander, DBT and ourselves working together to say, how do we meet the industrial imperative to protect our car manufacturers? How do we meet the consumer imperative to make this work for consumers? And how do we also meet the clean energy net zero imperative as well? So, and in a sense, sort of collaboration, it sounds like it should be a sort of automatic thing, but inevitably there can be sort of particular departmental interests which overlap but don't always completely coincide. And I think the mission idea, the mission process has given us a focus. I'll take DEFRA as well, the work that is going on to make sure that we have reforms in the planning system that are nature positive, but also allow us to have our clean energy infrastructure built is another good example.
And maybe after this session you get the comms guys on your mission board on the case to maybe sort of package that up for the public, because we all hear that the public is crying out for some good news stories to also address, the Richard Tices of this world. Thank you.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Was this a suggestion? Thank you. We look forward to seeing
yes, I think it's it's right to say that we are in a that government is in a battle with some people who want to upend this mission. I think it's really important to say, though, that the public get this in a way that Richard Tice and Nigel Farage definitely don't. The public do want to see action on clean energy. They do recognise whether it's, solar panels or the good jobs that we're creating. They absolutely recognise this, and I think part of this is about having confidence that we have the right arguments to help people, help make people's lives easier today and do the right thing for future generations.
Yeah, you've said that a number of times now. Polling evidence says that a significant majority agree with what you've just said, but then when they believe it's going to cost them more money, their attitude changes. I think do you accept that is a reality?
Look, the point is we've got to make this transition work in a way that is good for people's standard of living. So take what we announced on EV charging and EV support. It's about saying we're going to have to make this transition. It's the right thing to do. It can be good for our manufacturers because they can get ahead in producing the vehicles of the future. We want to do this in a way that works for consumers. Heat pumps. One of the reasons why we talked earlier about the question of levies and rebalancing and so on. Why are people raising this issue? Because at the moment the system is stacked against heat pumps, artificially stacked against them, even though they're more efficient. We have to find a way of making people better off from moving to this. So for me, it's all about saying, how do we do this and do it in a way that makes people better off? When the school gets solar panels on its roof, it's better for the school. They cut their energy bills. That's money for frontline teachers. So, I think this is absolutely an argument we can win, and that's what we intend to do.
Thank you very much. There.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask some questions around a couple of clean energy technologies that don't get as much attention. I want to just start by asking, do you think there's a risk that tunnel vision in the department will lead to us missing out on becoming world leaders in some of these other clean technologies?
I don't think I would characterise it quite in the way that you suggest, but I would make this acknowledgement to you that we've got to make sure that that sort of path dependency, to use a sort of really wonkish phrase, doesn't sort of rule out or undervalue technologies that could be helpful in the future. And it's something that, again, Jeremy and I discussed, something we're conscious of. At the same time, we've got to if we're going to support technologies, we've got to do so in a way that is genuinely value for money. And sometimes one of the hard things to judge is a technology might be really expensive now, and the people who advocate for the technology all say, yes, but offshore wind was incredibly expensive at one point, and you supported it, and it came down in price. And working out where that is going to happen, where it isn't going to happen, is one of the things. I've set up in the department, recently under Paul Monks, our Chief Scientific Advisor, it's called STAC, which stands for the Science and Technology Advisory Committee, because I thought we need a group of outside experts and scientists who can come in and look at issues like these newer technologies and say, you're undervaluing this, or you're valuing this correctly, and so on. So I'm very conscious of this.
Okay, so turning to geothermal as one of those technologies, to what extent do you think geothermal will be part of the energy mix by 2030 and 2050?
Look, we've in auction round 5 we awarded some CFDs around geothermal in Cornwall. I know that the current UK potential is estimated to be between 170 megawatts and 2 gigawatts in terms of geothermal. I can tell you it's one of the issues that I've asked our Science and Technology Advisory Committee to look at, and the potential role for technologies like geothermal. And obviously it's part of the auction round. At the moment, relatively expensive, but again, I know there are strong advocates for this, and it's something we really need to look at.
Do you agree that we need to think about heat as a resource to reduce demand on the electricity supply? And if you do, will you commit to consulting on and implementing a national geothermal strategy?
Why don't I take away that question of a national geothermal strategy? I want to look at the on the first part of your question, yes, but on the second part of your question, I think we need to look in detail at this, work out what the barriers are, what the potential is, but I'll undertake to come back to you.
Okay, and you might think about in that of course it's a potential domestic source of materials such as lithium as well. Okay, turning to another energy then, marine energy. Does the government plan to set specific targets for marine energy to incentivise investment in these renewables?
Look, I think there's various ways in which marine energy can play a role. I think it's less about setting a particular target and more about seeing in the different ways through the auction rounds that we can support marine energy. We have launched an industry-led, Michael Shanks launched the industry-led Marine Energy Task Force on the 16th of June to consider the role of marine energy deployment, and we'll look forward to the strategic roadmap that produces.
Okay. So we heard from the Severn Estuary Commission about their report on tidal range energy from the Severn, and following that inquiry session we sent a letter and got quite a disappointingly non-committal, quite vague response. So could you clarify now, today, what is the government's position on the Severn Estuary Commission's proposals?
I mean, there is a long history here, I think it's fair to say.
Over 100 years.
Indeed. Jeremy may want to add something, because I think he might have some previous on this. I mean, look, my position on this is no technology should be ruled out, and if it can be done in a value for money way, we should do it. And it's all about value for money for me. If it's value for the money for the bill payer and taxpayer, and it's a part of the low carbon mix, we definitely shouldn't be ruling it out. And whether that's nuclear or tidal, we should be open to it. And it's that value for money test that is the most important thing for me.
I would completely agree with that. The judgment we're trying to make is, do we think some deployment and support for deployment is going to bring that technology down the cost curve in a way that makes it competitive taking into account the specific characteristics of that technology and the advantages, potentially the diversification advantages, that it can bring to the wider system. That is a hard judgment to make, but that is what the department, that is the thought process that we have underway in the department. And while we remain open to all technologies, including those technologies that you've highlighted, sometimes in the past we found that support has not led to the costs coming down, or the project has turned out, some of the tidal range projects that we've seen in the past have turned out to actually end up with potentially very expensive strike prices on a sort of broadly comparable basis. And so this is not a straightforward, not an easy subject, even though we recognise these technologies are attractive and could potentially play a role.
And in part of the joy and sort of what's the right word, kind of challenge of my job is that often people will come to me and say, I have the answer for you, if only, and it doesn't require any government funding. And I'm like, all it requires is a CFD of £150 per megawatt hour. And I'm like, well, now I'm not saying that about this particular case, but this is the really difficult judgment that we're trying to make here, that things that can look like no-brainers, when you actually look into them, where you think, well, that is going to be incredibly expensive.
So what's the strike price? What's the risk transfer arrangement? What risks are being borne by the consumer and the taxpayer, and what is actually being borne by the developer? And how mature are the costs? Are the sort of the opening questions.
When you judge costs, do you take into account the fact that some forms of technology have a much longer lifetime? So we've already seen 60 years of tidal range power generation in France, for example. We're looking at 120-year life span, which is different to if you're looking at a wind turbine. It's different. Yeah. It's different again if you're looking at nuclear. So do you take that into account, and do you give a premium to technologies that provide stable generation rather than intermittent?
So we absolutely do seek to take that into account. It is not some of these questions are not perfectly modelable. And it is a complicated issue to compare technologies with different lifespans, but that is absolutely what the analysts in the department are seeking to do. So tidal range technology, to use the example, has a wonderful advantage that it is very predictable. You know exactly when it's going to work, and that brings some advantages to the system. But it's also very predictable that there will be times when it is not operating and not generating electricity. Unfortunately, some of those times when it is definitely not operating electricity will include the winter peaks in January, when the system is under most strain. So we take these things into account, but it is quite complex analysis.
Yeah, if it's any consolation, Secretary of State, I think the same people come and ask me the same questions and tell me the same stories about the wonderful new technologies they have. Whether they come to you first or me, I have
I don't know. We'll compare notes.
Maybe we will. The Mersey tidal barrage is a similar project. It goes to the question that Claire Young was just asking about funding for these very long periods of time. Is there any work being done about how potential funding for very much longer term projects might be delivered? It's true of nuclear as well as technologies like tidal. So
perhaps I could offer a view on that. So I think one area where the department has done a lot of thinking in recent years is on what we call the business model arrangements to support technologies. Obviously, the model that most people have heard of and aware of is the contract for difference model. Was 15 years, extending to 20 years for renewables. It's longer, it's 35 years for Hinkley, so that can provide long-term support. But increasingly, we're looking also at different forms of support, reflecting the characteristics of the technology. So obviously for Sizewell, we've moved to a regulated asset-based based model. For carbon capture, we're moving to something called a dispatchable power agreement, essentially a sort of more flexible CFD that incentivizes the plant to operate when we need it to operate. So that's what will apply for net zero Teesside. So we are adjusting the model according to the technology, its characteristics, its lifespan, and the role we need it to play in the system. But when looking at longer term support, I think we would say this day and age we would look at the RAB model as well as the CFD model.
I mean, and I think to sort of maybe sum up a bit, my question and I think it's an important question for us all to ask. My question to anyone coming forward with proposals is what's the price? The fundamental question here is what's the price, and is it value for money? I know that people have raised this question of the lifespan of some of these projects, and as Jeremy said, it is definitely something that we seek to take into account. And also, I also accept that one mustn't just go on what was concluded in the past. You need to keep looking at these issues, which is why I've asked Stack to look at these.
Thank you. We'll move on to Polly Billington, please.
Question 11.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned the nature positive energy transition, and I also noticed in the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan document commissioned to NISO that the SSEP, I think I can call it that, should also take into account the outputs of UK government programmes for England, such as the Marine Spatial Prioritisation Programme and the Land Use Framework. I'm interested to know what take into account means in that circumstance. When will we see that the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan is taking the land use framework into account? How will it be taken into account? How will we know it is happening? What difference will that make? Bearing in mind we have got, myself and Torquil in our constituencies and others across the country, have got climate valuable land, salt marsh and deep peat, that we need to make sure that we are, if we are protecting, we're mitigating, and indeed we're restoring, because these are vital to be able to contribute to our tackling of climate change.
Look, I think there's something I should take away to give you a sort of an answer that justifies the depth of the question. I think what I'd say overall is that, for years people promised a land use framework, and my colleague Steve Reed is actually delivering it, and that is very, very important. For years people have talked about, don't we need to plan our energy system better, and we're going to deliver a strategic spatial energy plan, which is going to be sort of crucial in the system of reform national pricing that we have, so we have energy generation in the right place. I think what that language indicates is we are determined to make sure that these things cohere in the way that land is used. But let me, because I think you've raised some very, bit below that top line, you've raised some very legitimate sort of questions about specifically what will it entail, and why don't I come back to you by letter?
Thank you very much. I mean, are you concerned that your draft NPS for energy could undermine the ability of developers to mitigate harm to nature, when it may also result in a small reduction of generational capacity?
No, I don't think so. Look, I think my strong view, and this is a big part of this is the work we've been doing on nature recovery with Steve as part of our plans, is that we can do this clean energy infrastructure in a way that builds the infrastructure we need and does so in a nature positive way. And look, overall, I think it's really important. I know it's something that you know about, but it's very, very important to remind people that the biggest threat to nature that we face, as I said in the House of Commons a week ago, is the climate crisis. And therefore, there is an imperative to act here.
Yeah, we've also got not just developers, but also larger organisations responsible for big pieces of transmission kit who do not have a good record in protecting or restoring nature, particularly climate valuable environments. So we need to have more reassurances of those proper governance on that.
Well, and we're determined to do that. And if you have examples where you think bad practice is going on, as part of Chris Stark's work, he has Clean Power Commissioners, including covering nature, and we'd be interested in working with you on that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I would refer you to the report we published on the national policy statement. It's got recommendations on the non-delivery by developers and on the role of deep peat, salt marsh and other environments in carbon reduction more widely. I will move on to Torquil Crichton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming in. Time is short, so in terms of mission-led government, if I ask my questions and you nod in agreement, that will save a lot of time. I have some questions on community energy and on the workforce. Secretary of State, we had some...
Feels like when you were in your previous life, talk.
Yeah. We had some exchanges last week in the Commons on community energy schemes, and I asked you if you would think NISO should prioritise grid connections for community-owned schemes and designate them as needed for the 2030 transition. Where are you on that?
So look, I think it's really, really important that we drive forward on community energy. I'm also conscious that NISO has lots of demands about what it should prioritise. You know, our North Star is delivering 2030 clean power, which is obviously challenging, absolutely achievable, but challenging. And so, you know, that is the number one imperative. It's worth saying, without going into this great length, you know, a very big transformation is happening, which is the prioritisation and the reordering of the queue. We had this first come, first served kind of slightly sort of Wild West queue. We're now actually going to prioritise what is required for clean power. That will then open up space, including for demand-led.
My question is, are you going to prioritise communities?
Absolutely, communities are an essential part of delivering, but I can't say to you we will prioritise community energy over large-scale projects if those large-scale projects are essential for us to meet Clean Power 2030, but it's a really big part of our plans.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, here's a bit from the 2015 Infrastructure Act. It says the Secretary of State may make regulations to give individuals resident in a community or groups connected to community the right to buy a stake in renewable energy generation facilities located in the community if it's land-based, or adjacent to the community if it's an offshore facility. That's in the 2015 Infrastructure Act. That is the opportunity of the 21st century, is it not? What would you advise the Secretary of State to do with that Act?
Well, look, shall I handle it? Jeremy is welcome to come in. I'm really interested in this clause, this kind of met clause or untriggered clause in the 2015 Act. I've been trying to sort of get to the bottom of how this ended up in. I think the Liberal Democrats may have had something to do with it. But look, we're looking very seriously at whether we can give expression to this clause, what it would mean in practice, because you've got to work out what it means in practice. But the whole focus of GB Energy on community energy is to empower communities, not just with community benefit, and this is what I've learned from you, but community stakes as well.
Let me give expression to it. It gives communities a right to take part in energy projects on their doorstep. That would really enhance support for energy.
Yeah, we're looking very, very seriously at it.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask.
Jeremy's welcome to give me some advice.
Given your answer just there, doesn't it make sense in answer to Torkel's first question to prioritise connections to community projects?
So explain again.
Doesn't it make sense to prioritise community projects to build the case for the transition?
I mean, look, absolutely, we've got to prioritise community projects. I'm just saying, I want to be just completely open with the committee. If you're saying prioritise community projects over a large-scale project that we need for 2030, it's going to be hard to do.
But couldn't you have an obligation on any of those big ones that they make sure that there is a significant stake that is owned by the community, so that we get that buy-in and that we've got some local ownership and governance and accountability?
Well, that's what we're looking
for this
at.
Big energy.
Well,
at the moment we're worried that this power that's currently there in the 2015 Act could go, and all you're going to end up with is more kind of community benefit fob off. Frankly.
Well, look, it's less that it goes and more that it doesn't get enacted. But look, I'm totally on your wavelength on this. That's why we've made GB Energy a big focus on community energy. I absolutely believe that we can deliver in a way that supports community energy.
Time is short, so I'll move on to the workforce. I'm encouraged by what you said, Secretary of State, that you'd want to encourage all companies in the energy sector to take seriously the role of trade unions. These trade unions, the GMB amongst them, I'm a member, want you to keep the North Sea open, want you to keep the taps turning the same way as Norway is, so that we have energy security from oil and gas while we go through that transition. They see you as not wanting to do that.
I don't think that's correct. Look, we had a very clear manifesto position, which was to keep existing fields open for their lifetime, and that's an important position. We also had a position that said we weren't going to issue new licenses to explore new fields. We're currently consulting on that. I am absolutely determined, Torquil, to build a just and prosperous transition in the North Sea, which is why building the future, as well as making sure we have a smooth transition of existing oil and gas, is so important. If you look at the recent report from the Robert Gordon University, for example, it, I think, talks in quite a lot of informed detail about how we manage this transition, and that's what we're absolutely committed to. For example, we stuck to our schedule of issuing the new guidance on EIAs, environmental impact assessments, following the Supreme Court judgment. The Treasury is currently consulting on the tax regime, which is, after all, the number one issue for lots of developers and companies in the North Sea. And so, I was delighted after the spending review to go and go and meet all the companies involved in the Acorn project. So we're absolutely committed to both parts of this.
Okay. What would help would be, in this transition, a just transition, would be a national workforce strategy from your department. We haven't seen it.
We're going to do it. We're going to do it. It's going to come out in the autumn. We've been working on it, Clean Energy Workforce Strategy, and it's something where we've had really good engagement from all of the trade unions and businesses. And what it's absolutely about is delivering this transition in a fair way. And look, let's be frank about it. Part of the challenge is matching the opportunities that could arise with the skilled workforce that is required by the companies. Because so many companies I meet say we're worried as to whether we're going to get the skilled workforce that we need. And, when I came into government, what surprised me was the level of detail on the needs. What depressed me was the lack of kind of plans, if you like, to meet the need. And we've got to do both parts of that.
And retrofit as well.
Retrofit, absolutely crucial part of it. We've got a training grant, which I think is helping to train 18,000 people in heat pump technology, but retrofit is also part of it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so much. Mike Reader.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to jump around a bit because I'm watching the clock. So my favourite topic, decarbonising the difficult bits. And I actually want to talk about your role in shaping strategy for other departments. So for my constituency, logistics is absolutely critical. The CCC also recognises we have to decarbonise the logistics sector to hit our net zero targets, but we haven't seen anything really from DFT in terms of low carbon fuels or a direction for that sector. Impacts on grid capacity, if we're going to have EVs running through the Midlands. What does your department do when other departments drag their feet?
I don't think that's necessarily at all a fair characterisation of my colleague Heidi Alexander, who's really enthusiastic supporter of this agenda. But why don't I take away the issue that that you raise, and as part of our work with DFT on mission-led government, but pass this on. Do
you actively identify these areas where the departments are responsible and put pressure to get that? Because ultimately, when we had we had a hearing last week, someone said you were responsible for net zero. I think it's the government. Yes. Actually, your head's on the line.
Let me say, Mike, I mean, look, part of what we're doing is coordinating across government a carbon budget delivery and growth plan, precisely because the previous government had 2 goes at this, the carbon budget delivery plan, and got found, not guilty is the wrong word, but found that their plans weren't lawful. So we've got till the end of October to produce a plan. And what's good is that is driving across government, whether it's in DEFRA or DFT or DBT or elsewhere, everybody playing their part in meeting our carbon budgets, and what you're talking about is absolutely part of it.
So smart meters, RTS, other programs that your department oversees. So a 15% reduction in smart meter installations last year. We had some quite shocking evidence around RTS, which meant your department had to step in to stop that rollout. With the government getting rid of the IPA and rolling into NISTA, which arguably has a more political angle, being responsible to the Treasury, how can we be assured that the programs you're delivering are delivered on time and to best value for the taxpayer?
Look, on both of these, we take the delivery of these very, very seriously. there are, I think, 39 million smart and advanced meters in homes and businesses across Britain now. Not enough of them are working in smart mode, and that's got to change, frankly. And we're going to be saying more about this in the coming weeks. But Martin Lewis and others have raised the problem of meters that aren't working. The numbers have fallen, but not by enough. And we're going to change that, and we're determined to change that. On RTS, I mean, look, this has been a long inheritance in the sense that people have been talking about this switch over for a long time. My colleague Miata Farnbula has led this well. We are now committed to a phase out, but it's a phase out to make sure we look after the welfare of those people on their RTS meters. And you'll be aware we've started this in a gradual way, and we are making progress on this, but we're very, very committed to delivering this in the right way. I don't know whether you want to add.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm tempted to add a quite bureaucratic answer on the sort of oversight and governance, because you asked about that. So I feel I should address that. I mean, in the department, of course, we do have very robust oversight of our large programs, including smart meters. But you referred to the creation of NISTA. I mean, NISTA is bringing together the National Infrastructure Commission and the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which already existed in the Cabinet Office. I think you're aware. It was the Cabinet Office bit of the machine. It was the IPA that actually led the oversight, if you like, the scrutiny of the government's major project portfolio, the GMPP projects. So that bit was already in government. NISTA is bringing them together. It is in government. I think that is a sensible change to be making. I think it is better to have that access to ministers and access to the advice that we're having in government. There was only a recently appointed chief executive, so still it's establishing itself and the processes and the process it needs underway. It's overseen by the infrastructure committee at a ministerial level.
You actually lead me well on to my next question. When Chris Stark came in, we questioned him on mission control and maturity of the organisation, and he was very honest that you didn't have in place the governance, the commercial, the project controls capabilities. You've got some great thinkers and strategists, but weren't into the weeds. And has that now been addressed? And I've actually heard the same from GB Energy as well. There's great announcements of big thinkers, but you're not getting into delivery. What is your department doing to make sure you're delivering, not just announcing new projects and funds?
The thing I would say is my department is now a delivery department. I think in the past sometimes it has been seen as more as a sort of policy in a department about frameworks, but we are responsible for, I think, the second largest portfolio of major projects in government, and we have spent it's been our big focus for the last 2.5 years since we were founded was making sure that we have the skills and the capabilities and the strong functional support that is needed on commerce, on project oversight, on things like digital functions, so that we can oversee these very, very large programs. So that is actually paying dividends now, as we are now overseeing large-scale nuclear projects, the development of carbon capture, as well as these long-standing programs.
If we do with the transport sector, we overlaid a mechanism like P3M3 to assess the maturity of your delivery. Would you be confident you'd be at a good, strong maturity level in terms of delivery?
Our programs are at different stages. Our mature programs have got mature delivery arrangements around them. But clearly, there are newer projects and programs that the department has that have only relatively recently been created, and we need to build the delivery capability in those cases.
I am keen,
but I'm confident in the department's capability.
Keen to finish on time because we promised to. Before I do, when are the British staff pensioners going to get more of their money?
So this is an issue that I care deeply about. I'm incredibly proud of what we did on the mine workers pension scheme, which has increased miners' pensions by an average of £29 per week, and I think is a really important thing that the government did. This is something that is being taken forward by my colleague Sarah Jones, but the BCSS issue is very important to me. I should say that because of my significant interest in this as a coal mining MP, it's being taken forward by Sarah rather than me. But as a constituency MP, I'm extremely keen on a good and positive outcome on this issue.
Thank Thank you. Perhaps you can encourage Sarah to let us have a bit more detail in the near future. Secretary of State, Permanent Secretary, thank you very much for your evidence today, and we will end the session there. Order, order.